The most obvious place for where one of those dungeons could have went, I think a lot of people would think, is with like the Goddess Pearl, the Lineru one or whatever, where Jaboon just gives it to you, and you're kind of like, I didn't really do a dungeon for this pearl.
Boy, you just spoke another language there.
Yeah. Well, you know, when you go to Great Fish Isle.
Oh, I know what you mean, but when you started saying LaRue's, Jaboo's,
when you went to the place and they give you the thing.
Yeah.
Ryan, we are simple men. When we started A Cast of the Past, we knew that there were going to be a couple of different video game series that throughout the years, we were going to play as many of those games as possible. One of the most obvious examples has got to be The Legend of Zelda. We talked about A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening, the regular version and DX, but there was always one Zelda game that we were looking at because when it was first announced, I felt like there were many different things that Nintendo did that upset many different gamers. And it is now time to sit here and talk about Wind Waker for both the GameCube, and a couple of us also played the version on the Wii U, which is available in high definition. And we're going to be talking about that right now in another exciting edition of A Cast of the Past, with a brand new episode available every single Sunday with yours truly, the basic Zelda gamer, Juan Velas from Puerto Rico, joining me, the moderate level Zelda gamer from London, Ontario, Keith Hamilton. Would you say you're, I mean, I just assumed you're the moderate Zelda guy here. I'm sorry.
I mean, I've played a bunch of them and I've beaten a bunch of them, so yeah, I'll take moderate, but like, not to the level of that I own like the Zelda encyclopedia. So I don't know where that moderate level lies, if it lies in Hyrule or if it lies in Lowrule, but I'm somewhere in the middle rule.
Okay, but
Keith,
I got a question. I got a question for you though. Do you own any kind of shield related to the Zelda games?
No.
Okay, then we got another guy here. I mean, I'm going to ask him, though.
No, I don't.
You're from Boston. Your name is Ryan McNulty. Do you, by any chance, own any kind of Zelda shield?
I do. I have a Hylian shield, and there's an ocarina behind me as well, and I have a Master Sword.
So needless to say,
I'm a little bit of a nerd for Zelda.
Just so a little bit. So the pressure's on, right? At least for you. I mean, Keith and I, we can do whatever, but I think that you're very excited. How excited are you that we're finally going to talk about a Wind Waker?
I'm pretty excited. Wind Waker is definitely one of the more important games for me becoming a Zelda fan. And also, this is the Zelda game I've gone the longest without playing, and this was my first time playing the HD version for Wii U. So it kind of brought a whole new perspective for me on this game, and I've been excited to cover it for a while.
Yeah, and for everybody watching and listening, please consider going on social media or even to our Discord at acastofthepast.com/Discord, and you can let us know, what do you think about Wind Waker? Because at some point we were thinking maybe we do Ocarina of Time, right? I think that's like the obvious Zelda game that people want to get out of the way. And then after that we thought, well, maybe let's do Majora's Mask. But I actually want to start it off with Keith here. How excited were you, knowing all the different Zelda games out there? You and I didn't really have an experience with Wind Waker growing up, so playing it now in 2020, what was your excitement level at?
It was very high for this game because, like I mentioned, I've played a good majority of the Zelda games. I will say a good majority of the console Zelda games. I never really touched the handheld ones before playing Link's Awakening in the archive, like the odd one here and there. I think I put a bunch of hours into Phantom Hourglass, and that's about it. But Wind Waker was the one Zelda game for the consoles that I've never played because I didn't come to the GameCube until like very, very late in its life, and I mostly just used it as like a wrestling video game and Smash Brothers machine, so I had never touched Wind Waker, but you hear throughout the years just how it's one of the best games for the GameCube, so I was always excited about it, and having enjoyed the other Zelda games that I've played, it made me very excited for it, and I'm really happy that we're covering it today.
It's one of those games that for me, I always mentioned, it looked cute, but I just wasn't excited. I also played a game like Super Mario Sunshine, and I actually think Sunshine had a lot to do with me not being excited about this game, because when I played Sunshine, I was thinking to myself, maybe the GameCube isn't for me because it just didn't really click with me, right? And then when I saw the cel-shaded graphics, I just tuned out. Now, in your
Was
case,
it the
Ryan,
lunchbox handle? The lunchbox handle on the GameCube that really sold it for you?
I mean, I love I own the black GameCube. I love carrying that thing, which I never took my GameCube anywhere.
Where did you take it? Why? When did you have a reason to actually use
I just
that
grabbed
handle?
it because honestly, I never understood what the handle was meant for. Just like grabbing it, I thought it's just like, well, that's kind of like a cute thing.
If
but
you had the screen that came with it, it was worth having the handle because you'd be carrying it around to places. But unless you had that, there was no reason to ever take it anywhere unless maybe to a friend's house. But
So Ryan, in your case, because you're definitely the biggest Zelda fan between the three of us, what was your take on this game? Because for context, Wind Waker came out in 2003. The previous Zelda console game was a Majora's Mask in 2000. So we have a couple of years, and then in between we got Oracle of Ages in 2001, Oracle of Seasons, Link to the Past / Four Swords in the GBA in 2002. So what was Ryan's excitement level in 2003 being a fairly big Zelda fan?
it was pretty high because this was the first Zelda game where I was actually anticipating it. The other ones, like Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, I wasn't paying attention to like the gaming magazines or websites, hearing the news and like, oh, a new Zelda game's coming out. But after playing, Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time on N64 and then getting a GameCube, there was a lot of games I was anticipating, Mario Sunshine, and then reading news about Wind Waker. So I was fairly hyped for it, and the cel shaded graphics definitely bummed me out at first, but it came to a point where I just wanted to play the next Zelda, so I didn't care.
I need to make a quick redaction to what I said earlier about the handheld Zelda games because I played a crap load of A Link Between Worlds, so I do have more handheld experience than I previously stated.
I mean, that's a little bit more.
Yeah, and that is a great game, my God.
I bought it because of you two, so I hope to someday be able to play it and maybe talk about it here, but I feel like we need to get the elephant in the room only to then kick him right out, because aside from the cel-shaded graphics in this game, there was another reason why a lot of people just honestly were not happy with it without having even played it. And that's because we got to go back to Space World 2000, which I even told both of these two guys, it's either a Nintendo event or a porn website. I'm not sure. Please don't look that up. But in Space World 2000, Ryan, what happened regarding the next upcoming Zelda game for Nintendo's future console?
So essentially, during this time, they showed this trailer basically to show off the capabilities of the GameCube. And in it, there was probably like a 10-second clip, or maybe even less, of a sword fight between Link and Ganondorf that everyone was freaking out over and getting super hyped. If you look back now, what are we, 20 years later for this, you're going to say, oh, that kind of looks like crap and it's not very impressive. And you look at Wind Waker based on GameCube, not even the HD version, you're going to be like, okay, Nintendo made the right call. But back then, those were super impressive graphics, and that's when that little clip of that sword fight between Ganondorf and Link, which is basically just kind of a upgraded version of like the Ocarina of Time encounter, it basically just stuck in so many kids' minds because these types of things, although not super accessible, like the video, I don't know, you had to download it on Windows Media Player to even see it or something back then. But that stuck really in a lot of people's minds, and that is the game that they were expecting. And it's when they got early screenshots of what Wind Waker was actually going to look like, it definitely upset a lot of people.
Yeah, and the art style and that direction is really the more important thing about, or more than how it looks now versus Wind Waker, because at the time, if you're showing off this tech demo and you're showing off a Zelda game of this is what is possible on the GameCube, and you are referencing one of Nintendo's best games of all time, Ocarina of Time, you are leading people to get very excited about that one thing. I sit here, I watched it today just to refresh my memory, still wanting that thing that they showed at Space World 2000, and it's really unfortunate that it exists.
Is that not Twilight Princess?
I mean, kind of, yes.
Because Twilight Princess was essentially that response. It was the counter.
They're like, hey,
to
we're doing
Wind
it.
Waker.
Just wait another generation.
Here's your game.
Yeah.
Hey, look, it's kind of like Ocarina of Time. It's got the more realistic graphics and all that.
For the most part,
and I would argue that you look at the GameCube version of both games and the Wind Waker versus Twilight Princess, Wind Waker graphics, I think, have aged far better.
Oh, by a mile.
And you can even look to when the Wii U came out, they also showed a tech demo of like Link. It was basically based off of Twilight Princess. It was Link fighting like the big spider, like Armagoma or whatever. And then we all know that ended up, what do we actually get? Breath of the Wild, which art style looks very different than that demo that we got for the Wii U. So the moral of the story, although people didn't get as up in arms about that, because I think everyone learned their lessons of they know a tech demo when they see it now. It's much more common for people to watch E3 and things like that. But back then, I think people just didn't understand it was a tech demo and that it had nothing to do other than to just show the power of the GameCube.
And here's the problem with what you said there, Ryan, where yes, we did get it, I guess, but unfortunately, in order to get there, you need to play through Twilight Princess.
Oh my goodness. Oh my
goodness. We kind of
goodness.
didn't at the same time. Stupid wolf. Hate
But
it.
but
we're not talking about Twilight
Princess.
Princess.
That is a discussion for another
exactly.
day.
We got to save that for a future episode there. But let's not, once again, let's just keep in mind that this game came out in 2003. So it's worth pointing out that just to figure out, as we played in 2020 in different versions, Keith played it on the GameCube, Ryan and I played the versions on the Wii U, and that will factor into account because it's not just a high-definition version of the game. There are some key differences, and Ryan is going to be the mediator of that part because you actually play both versions, right? So you can fully bring that comparison, but it's also worth pointing out the year it came out because it is a year of a lot more dark, grittier games, right? This is a generation that people want, the kids are growing up. They want to play the adult game. So when they think adult, they think of Toon Link. And obviously that was very heavy for many people to take in. But before we get to the overall impressions, Ryan, could you give us a summary of the story of Wind Waker?
So to go quickly with the story, and then we can definitely get into the meat a little bit later. Basically, this is really the true sequel to Ocarina of Time. You can look at Majora's Mask. Yes, it's the same Link, but that's very much like a side story. This is the real sequel to Ocarina of Time. Essentially, there's two endings to Ocarina of Time, really. Once Ganondorf's defeated, Zelda sends Link back in time, and there's no Link in that time, right? So this is where the Wind Waker kind of takes over. There's no hero to save anyone, and Ganondorf eventually comes back. He was sealed away, and he eventually breaks out. And because there's no hero, he wreaks havoc over Hyrule, and the people have no choice, so they pray to the gods, and the gods flood Hyrule, and then that's why there's these vast oceans, and people just basically retreated to the mountaintops, and hundreds of years pass, and we kind of come to where we are at the Wind Waker, where Ganondorf is trying to regain his power, so he's sending his bird friend looking for young girls, which is a little creepy, but he's basically trying to find Zelda.
Space World 2000 question.
He's trying to reclaim the Triforce, so he's looking for Zelda, who would most likely have the Triforce of Wisdom. And then, yes, Keith throwing his jokes in. But anyway.
I broke one. Sorry, everybody.
Yeah.
Keep going, Ryan.
Yeah, so what happens is the the Helmerach King, who's this big bird, has captured this girl named Tetra, and then Link is able to save her, but in saving her, Link's sister accidentally gets kidnapped instead of Tetra.
Worst birthday ever, by the way.
Yeah, it's Link's birthday. Yeah. So he's trying to save his sister, and everything kind of ensues in like him meeting Tetra, and then he's able to acquire the 3 pearls you need to get. He gets the Master Sword by going under to Hyrule, and then eventually has to power it up to then defeat Ganon, and Tetra is revealed to be Zelda. So that is long story short, and then of course you have to defeat Ganon
thick
in Hyrule.
Ganon,
as always.
It's thick Ganon.
Yeah, thick power Ganon.
But it's a little bit of a more different Ganon, I would say.
I will say I really appreciate the story of Zelda. Like, I am not somebody that goes in that deep into the lore and stuff, but just thinking about the Zelda franchise and how always on like the most macro scale, it is kind of the same simplistic story of there is a hero of time, there is a princess, and then there is an evil dude, and all of them have a piece of the Triforce, and then you need to beat the evil dude, and something with Zelda ensues, you rescue her, something involves the Triforce. Like, I really, really appreciate through all of these iterations of the game, and like fine details aside, I really like how it's always stayed true to that, because
they have built it into, and like Skyward Sword is kind of built on this lore of basically making it that this is essentially like a curse that has been destined to repeat itself over and over again. So if an evil rises to power with the Triforce of Power, then there will be a Zelda and there will be a hero, and like the events will keep occurring, and they will be reincarnated, and it will continue for all of time, essentially. But the key thing here is that through most of this, it is actually the same Ganon. So this Ganondorf that we see is the same Ganondorf that's defeated at the end of Ocarina of Time.
Just put on a few pounds in between the two.
He lost a lot of his power, so he can't do much. So
he's got probably a little bummed out, man.
Yeah, he might be eating his sadness a little bit to make up for it. But it is definitely a more humbled Ganondorf that you meet in this game. He's not just this complete evil. He even talks a little bit about why he tries to have sympathy, like, oh, he was just looking out for his people, and he wanted to kind of, he was jealous of what Hyrule had versus him in a desert with all of his people suffering. So you get a little bit more than just, I'm the evil bad guy that's going to take over. Of course, he's still an evil bad guy that's going to take over, but they give you a little bit more, and I do appreciate it. And I will say this is actually my favorite story in all of the Zelda series, because it does a little bit of building off of one of the best Zelda games ever, and then just having a lot of fun characters, and in my opinion, the best Ganondorf character-wise in any Zelda game.
Yeah, I personally was a really big fan of the story, and it's one of those simple twists, and it's so weird because we reviewed Terminator Dark Fate, and I think this and that movie have some similarities where the overall structure of what happens is the same as the other ones, right? Like here, he's not Link, he is somebody that's trying to be the hero, right? So they put on the outfit, but he plays exactly the same as you would expect in the other games. But the little twists that they do, I like the fact that
he is Link, but he's not of a hero's lineage or anything like that.
It's not literally the exact same character that we've seen in other games, right? It's like alternate timelines or whatever the case, but what I like is the way they present him. He's just a kid. The fact that the game starts off in like his birthday, his sister gets kidnapped, so he's like a victim of circumstance, but then throughout that he stumbles upon Tetra. I really liked it because there's not like a whole lot of dialogue, and I don't care about a whole lot of dialogue, but what is there, it means a lot more when you get to the Tower of the Gods and other parts of the game. And I actually wanted to start our dialogue here because usually with different games who are very gameplay oriented. I mean, they are meant to be played, right? But so much of this game's appeal to me throughout it lies on the actual story. But I would actually like to start off with Ryan, because I know Keith and I are going to have a very different perspective about this game, playing it for the very first time. So in your case, was this your first time playing it, the version on Wii U, or
Yes.
first time finishing it?
First time. Yeah. I mean, I watched my roommate play through a lot of the Wii U version, and I maybe like messed around with it a little bit. But as far as like doing a full playthrough, this is the first time I've played the Wii U version.
And what did you think about it? Because I know there's a couple of differences, and we'll talk about that for sure. There is going to be a point where that is the conversation, but just having seen it like on a CRT back in the day, right? And then seeing it now widescreen, high definition, and playing a thing that you played before, what did you think about it?
I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. This was at one point my favorite Zelda game, but I've come to enjoy some other ones a little bit more. But it's been like I said, it's been a long time since I've played this game. I probably haven't played it all the way through since I owned a GameCube back in like 2005 or something like that. So it had been quite a long time, and I've played a lot of other Zelda games since. So it's given me kind of a new perspective on the game. And I would say visually on the HD version, it's one of like the best looking games ever. It's just, I never felt so, and I definitely Zelda bias here being a huge fan, but like I've never, like certain parts, especially like when you're at Outset Island in the beginning and it's really bright and sunny.
Makes you feel good.
You're just, it's just like I don't know the word. I'm missing the word. But anyway, it looks incredible. There's definitely still some things I wish they would have fixed. Like at the top of Outset Island, it's just kind of like a painted JPEG of trees like on the top of the mountain. I wish they would have like made 3D models of that. But whatever. There's a few things that are really like aging it a teeny bit. But looks wise, it's great. The dungeons, definitely and we'll get into that more, but some of them were a little bit faster than I remember them being. Overall, the game felt much faster, but I know the HD version definitely cleaned some things up. But I really, really enjoyed my time with it, and the HD version is 100% the way to go every single time. But I went through it a lot smoother than I expected and enjoyed it a lot.
And that's a really tricky thing, because one of the things that we do with this podcast is we try to play the most faithful or original version of a game, right? Because when you make a lot of changes, it's like, well, we like this, but we like the original one, right? Here's like a different situation where the game is largely the same, but I haven't seen anybody say, oh, you don't play the HD version. You have to go back and play the GameCube one. So it said a lot to me that people just said, hey,
let me
Keith,
tell you.
We're sorry.
Yeah, let me tell you, as somebody that played the GameCube version of this game, I will sit here and tell you that in 2020 and going onwards, the Wind Waker is a Wii U game. There is no question about it.
Okay. So having said that, I mean, I feel like it is time, my friends, to give Keith Hamilton, the Hammy Ham, the floor. Share us your general impressions of Wind Waker.
So, general impressions wise, I feel like you need to have two conversations about Wind Waker. You can't just put it into one big impression, where when you're talking about the visuals and the aesthetic of this game, then as far as I'm concerned, it is beautiful. Even on the GameCube version, while things aren't as crisp and sharp as they look, just because you're dealing with different resolutions and scaling with the Wii U versus the GameCube, the game still looks amazing. The art style ages well, and
it has to be the best looking GameCube game without question.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, as far as going back and looking at GameCube stuff, it's no question.
Probably games like that, Beautiful Joe, those games with that aesthetic, yeah.
But the thing that I think puts this game above, like Beautiful Joe, and that's hard to say, the cell shaded style that they went with is the articulation and the way that the characters emote and bring the world to life. Like, it's not just the graphics that make Wind Waker look as good as they did, but the fact that they really leaned into this toon style and did like over the top animations and like over the top facial expressions with the characters. Especially my favorite part is when you're actually using the Wind Waker and just that little like concentrated look on Link's face as he's doing it. Like, I love that little touch so much, and the game is filled with that, and I love it so much compared to the later styles of like a Twilight Princess, that dark, edgier style of Zelda.
I was actually really impressed with when you go to the island where there's the huge wind, like where the wind temple is, that there's even like an animation for Link like walking through heavy winds.
Exactly.
Like, he has an expression and he puts his arm up and everything. And I
awesome.
totally forgot about that.
And then that's the good part of this conversation. Now, as far as the other half, I think you need to separate all of that from the gameplay of Wind Waker. And I imagine this is something that we're going to be in contention about, having played the two different versions. But to me, Wind Waker was a game, gameplay-wise, that kind of kept getting in its own way, where it starts off very strong. Like, the analogy that I want to have, and I'm going to rely on your football expertise on this one a little bit, Ryan, is, was there any point in time where, like, in a big game like a Super Bowl, there was a team that, like, they had the game on lock and in the first half, and then just blew it? Like, they just somebody pooped the bed, and then they
This
lost
one's especially great for me because it was a Patriots game. But in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, the Falcons had a 28-3 lead in I want to say towards the end of the third quarter of the game, and they blew it, and the Patriots came back and won.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker are the Atlanta Falcons of that game, because it starts out so strong. Oh, it starts out so good. Like, the combat feels good. It's very much like Ocarina, but updated. You kind of have those new tools at your disposal, and it feels a little crisper. The sailing feels good. Like, I'm somebody that in real life loves boating. Like, I have my boating license, and a couple of years ago, one of my favorite things to do would be like to go out on the water and fish. I love that so much.
For the 1 month that the water isn't frozen in Canada.
Yeah, for that very, very brief time. So, like, I really liked the feel of the sailing in this game, because they actually do a very good job of nailing it at the beginning of just being out on the water. It's calming. I found it relaxing, where I was looking forward to it after leaving a dungeon, and it was kind of like my cooldown period after going into a dungeon. And then somewhere around the middle, things change in that game, where it really starts to feel like it's stepping on its own feet, where the pace gets thrown off. I think the exact point that I will, like, if I were to pinpoint it, it's around the time that the Zelda reveal happens, getting a little ahead of ourselves. Like, everything after that has a whole different feel to it, where even that fun, toony feeling kind of gets pushed to the wayside, and it feels more like a traditional Zelda games. Things happen in the dungeons that I just did not like in those last few dungeons, and just like having to stop and go through the different
Keith, do you
items.
like the Triforce?
Oh, we're not even going to get to that. Oh my God. Oh, okay.
I'm just like, let's get to it. We're getting to it.
Breathe. So yeah, just to finish my point, like there's a tonal shift in gameplay that happens at the second half of that game that just I bounced off of really hard, and was not I did not like it, how it changed and how the pace changed and what it needed you to do to up the difficulty. It just didn't resonate with me at all until the very end, and it was a huge turnoff gameplay wise.
Yeah, for me, I haven't been torn so hard while I play a game, in my opinion, for a very long time, because I played this game in the first like 5 hours. I thought to myself, why haven't I played this before? Like, I was just full on, because all of
I remember messaging you guys like, why the hell have I never played Wind Waker? Then I played another hour, and I'm like, oh, okay.
And look, I do want to preface this. In no way a bad game. It's a great game. It's a great game. I'm going to leave it there. But I don't like it when a game has a very specific style and flow and pacing, and then just boom, just a magically sharp turn without any real prep. The game is largely a linear experience for the very first part. Like, you don't really have to think about what to do. And I'm not saying that I was okay with that, because I knew it's like, hey, you sail in this game. So I knew going in, eventually you're going to like try to find things, right? I mean, they got to use these mechanics. But I thought the game did a very poor job at really getting you ready for that, because the game goes from, well, you're really just going from point A to point B, don't really bother exploring, to no. Like, now,
jokes aside, they throw you right off the deep end.
I think they held your hand very tightly at the beginning, and then they just let go. And you're like, oh, what the hell? And I think the main part we're all talking about is after you do the Tower of the Gods and you get the Master Sword, then essentially they say, oh, here's the 2 temples you have to do. And then you go there and you don't have the items you need to get to them. But the problem is, to get those 2 items you need to get the fire and ice arrows, which they really don't tell you how to get.
No.
And I think that's the biggest problem, because if you talk to the fish, like you feed a fish at any point on the map, and then it will mark it on the map, and they'll usually tell you something. So if you feed the fish at those 2 islands, they actually tell you how you can get the item. They tell you where to go, essentially. But the problem is you need the fire and ice arrows. If they had been better at guiding you towards those, then I don't think it would have been as bad, because then you would have had what you needed, and then they would have guided you to then go to those 2 fire and ice islands, and you would have been fine. But because there's that item in between that you need, it's where everyone gets lost. And I remember playing this as a kid and always like forgetting what to do and having to look it up, because they really just kind of set you adrift. No pun intended.
No, like in my case, honestly, I had to look up a walkthrough at that point, because I was just thinking, hey, I mean, you have me going nonstop. There's no reason for me to think any of this would change. And something that, I didn't beat Breath of the Wild, but I feel like this game does have some similarities with other ones, which is, you know what you need to do, right? So your sister gets kidnapped in one part of the game, and it's about rescuing her, but you're not, strong enough. And then you visit some locations in the game more than once. And I actually like that part of the game, because it's like, hey, you want to become stronger. I just think that they go from a very linear way of going about it to then a very abstract one. And even after that, like even before we get to the Triforce part, right? So even in these other parts where, you got to go to 2 different temples, but it's not as easy as walking up to those temples and going into them. You have to get other items. But where do you get those items? They're fairly vague. And I tried to do my research for a while, thinking just like, am I missing something? Am I not? And there's a lot of hints. And I get that with a game like Zelda, in general, like adventuring out, like exploring is part of the game, right? I just think that, once again, if they had prepared me a little bit more, if they had teased, it's like, Super Metroid. I haven't even played more than 30 minutes of that game, but if there's one thing that always intrigues me, is that game at the very beginning, you have everything, but then they quickly strip it away. But that lets me know, okay, so we're getting up to that point. That is the point of the game, right? Here, I felt like, as much as I loved the visual presentation and the gameplay, because the sword play, I love Ocarina of Time, and I feel like it's that, but a little bit more paced. I think the camera is sometimes a challenge, depending on the situation. I love the variety. We're going to talk about the boss fights and all of that eventually, but the game did lose me in that later part of the game. And when you eventually get to the Triforce part, if I wasn't playing this for review, there is no way this guy would have beaten this game. Like you could not have paid me, because I'm just like, dude, you're already abstract. That's like,
you have
hey,
no idea.
Yeah, you don't even know how bad the GameCube version is.
It is the one example, because I was like you, where I used a guide up to that point, because just the whole getting lost, trying to get to the 2 temples, and then I went to the Earth Temple first, and that Earth Temple just beat me down. Like, I'm not a big fan of like escort quests in video games, and I will argue that those last 2 temples in this game are some of the worst escort quests that I've ever played. I did not like them at all. So the game had just kind of just burned me out once I got to that point. But had I not, I am so thankful I used a guide, just because I didn't even realize that the worst had yet to come at that point.
Yeah, I'll be honest, back in the day, I pretty much always used a guide for the Triforce Fetch quest. I think we might as well just get into the GameCube and Wii U differences, since we keep bringing it up. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so in the HD version, they give you this thing called the Incredible chart, and that essentially tells you like where the Triforce charts are, and instead of changing, because in the GameCube version, you don't just get a Triforce piece by doing something. Every single Triforce piece needs a Triforce chart first.
And not only that,
they all have to be deciphered.
And
right?
Not only that, the deciphering costs a ton of rubies.
How much did it cost in GameCube?
It was like 363 or something like that.
Okay, so it was about the same in the HD, but you only had to do that.
You only had to do 3 versus 8. So being so thankful that I had this guide, there was a part of it like in the Wind Temple saying like, you want to stay right here and farm rubies for the next hour until you're over 3,000 rubies. Because I'm so thankful I had that at my disposal, because I could not imagine going through that and trying to farm the rubies in order to have enough to decipher all of those Triforce pieces. God help anybody that didn't do that.
Yeah, so you need to get 8 Triforce pieces. The HD version speeds that up and gives you that incredible chart, which basically tells you where all of them are. The only thing they don't tell you is that you need that ghost ship chart, which you have to do to be able to get into the ghost ship, which has a Triforce piece. So me, having played the GameCube version multiple times back in the day, always using a guide and dreading that part, playing the HD version, I was like, oh, I actually kind of like this quest. Because I've done that version enough times. And for me, like the way that they fixed it up, I actually found it to be really fun, but I also knew what I was getting into. And I've done the worst version multiple times. Other big differences, talking about the dungeons, particularly the Earth Temple is annoying with this, but when you have to keep playing the command melody over and over again, when you play it, much like in Ocarina of Time, normally you'll do the command, you play the song yourself, and then you have to watch Link like wave the baton. But fortunately in the HD version, for these scenarios, they cut out Link having to watch Link do it.
Okay. Ooh.
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed that, but once you played it yourself, it just immediately zoomed in. But yeah, Keith had to watch that every single time. Because the Earth Temple is particularly bad with having to play that command melody a lot.
With the puzzles, you're switching back and forth between the 2 characters a lot, trying to reflect the light, and oh my god.
So that's a big one. And they do that in a lot of other places too, where you play the baton that they cut out, Link redoing it. Another huge one, of course, is the Swift Sail, which is just the greatest thing ever.
I am genuinely jealous that you guys got to use that in this game.
In the GameCube version of Wind Waker, if you want to sail somewhere, you have to change the direction of the wind to where you want to go. And if you need to go like diagonal, that means you might have to go up a few squares and then change the direction to go east.
You're doing a 90-degree angle. You can't do diagonal.
Yeah, you can actually set it like southwest or in diagonal directions if you want to. But either way, every time you're moving, you have to change the direction of wind.
Which is annoying.
Swift Sail, automatically the wind will go whichever way you're facing, and it's faster. So like the boat actually goes faster. It is just the greatest thing
does
ever.
your boat go fast, Keith?
It didn't. But honestly, the boat speed did not bother me in the game, just because, like I mentioned, I loved the whole cooldown of sailing, with the exception of the Triforce quest, because it gets quite tedious at that point. But having to stop and then do the wind melody over and over again, just because, like, okay, I moved 2 blocks south, now I want to go east, so let's stop, let's do it again. Oh god, I screwed up the timing, let's do it again, let's sit here and conduct for a minute or two, and then having to do that multiple times, like, it made me hate the part of the game I enjoyed the most, which was the sailing, and just having, like, all of those factors combined made it extremely tedious, and it's most of the reason why I joked that Wind Waker is a Wii U game now, because if it fixes all of that stuff up, then it is just not even close. You don't even play it for nostalgia reasons.
Yeah,
that is the version
unless
to
you're
play.
like a speed runner and the GameCube version's faster or whatever. But and now you guys might understand, like, a quick thing on speed runs. One of the big holy grails for a long time in speed runs was called barrier skip. So everyone knows under Hyrule there's that big wall. Mm-hmm. And you can get right to Ganon's tower. So it wasn't until maybe like a year and a half ago that people figured out how to glitch through that barrier.
Really?
It's always been like a holy grail speedrun thing, because obviously if you can get through you can cut out a huge chunk of the game. So people did actually figure out how to get through that. It took a very long time, but that is a cool little nugget of information.
That is good to know, my friend. So with that, I would like to focus a little bit more on the gameplay, because I do think there's a lot of positive things about it. Like, for me, I really enjoyed, especially on the Wii U. And I think, Ryan, this is a problem for me, because I don't think anybody that hasn't played the Zelda games on the Wii U, I know it may seem stupidly simple, the whole fact that you look at the bottom screen and the item menu is there. I don't think I could ever go back to that. And the fact that I know I have to, because it's like, we have the Switch now, right? And is Twilight Princess like that as well? I don't know.
Yeah. Twilight Princess is the same. And really, the Wii U, it's why I'm really happy I own one, because even if they come out with Switch ports for Twilight Princess and Wind Waker, I do think Wii U will be the definitive way to play those games.
Yeah, because Keith,
handy.
It's so good because you don't have to pause. Like, the first few times I paused out of habit, then I'm like, oh, okay, let me switch this. The first time I did it, I'm like, oh man, this just, like, it's so fluid, and switching to the different weapons, and you can actually maneuver the Wii U around. So if you want to aim with the bow and arrow, you can actually do that. And it was one of my favorite things.
On that, I hate gyroscope
that part,
stuff.
Yeah, I didn't do the gyroscope part as much, but then also in the HD version, they did allow you to, like, when Link's aiming his boomerang or his, like, grappling hook, Link can actually move around, whereas you were stationary in the GameCube version.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's a little bit hard to control unless you have put the item to your R button. Yeah. So normally I would always leave the bow at R button, because that just felt like the one that felt best to use while moving around. Most of the time, the grappling hook, I would just stay still anyway, because it's not really like a combat weapon. You can use it in combat if you want to, like, snatch items and stuff like that, but for the most part, it's really not a combat item.
Yeah, Keith, it's interesting, because it's something I never really thought about having, because I just assume that's a Zelda thing, because I'm trying to remember, do they do that in the 3DS games? Or at least, because I know in Phantom Hourglass, the bottom screen was just the map. And
the top. So in Phantom Hourglass, the top screen's the map, because you have the style. You control the stylus. Yeah. So you can, you have the map in Phantom Hourglass at the top, so it is very nice, and it works really well for, like, 3DS games.
But it's just something that, like, I don't know. I'm ignorant in knowing if I want it or not, because I just playing this, really I never really thought of it.
Have you played Ocarina of Time on 3DS?
No, I haven't. I haven't played it.
Yeah, it's really nice to have
remakes.
Yeah, it's super nice to have the map at the bottom, and then also they added like extra item slots, and like the ocarina has a dedicated thing. I also like that in the HD version, they made the baton a dedicated thing on the D-pad, so you didn't have to have it
just
equipped.
pressing up.
Yeah, there was another. There's so many quality of life stuff.
Don't play the GameCube version, people. Just don't. Just throw it out.
Yeah, because like you said before, with like, a lot of times we like to play like the original experience, but when it comes to a thing where I feel nothing is really lost on the experience. Like, yeah, if you want to be a hard ass and do the OG Triforce quest, go for it. But I don't think you're missing anything.
You gain nothing. You only lose by doing that.
Yeah, I don't think you gain anything important, and it would only just make you dislike the game more. Case in point with Keith.
Exactly. But what did you like about the game the most, Keith, from a gameplay perspective? Whether it be a specific item, you got the grappling hook, you got a couple different things. What was your favorite thing about it?
For the most part, I would say the bosses were my favorite part of the game. Like, yes, they're very much, and I specify even in the dungeons that I wasn't a big fan of, I enjoyed the bosses in those as well. It's mostly falls into the Zelda trope of, you get the item and that's what you use to beat the boss with. But I'm a big fan of the designs of the bosses and how large they were for the most part. Like, you really felt like you were taking out some epic creature at the end of this dungeon, and they delivered quite well with that, all the way up to the final boss fight with Ganondorf. So for the most part, I would say the boss fight and the design. I lean towards the early bosses as my favorites more than the later bosses, because they were cool. But hey, the ghost that turns into the bunch of ghosts that turn into a ghost, we've kind of seen that before, and he kind of sucks. But like the giant spider that you have to knock the ceiling down onto, the Andross looking thing with the two hands, like those were all very cool designs, and they were awesome.
Something that I like about that is that I think a lot of the bosses are not, once you figure out the pattern, they are super easy, but they do have that initial period of just like, well, what do you do with this? Because it's like, I have a hook, right? But what do you do? And
you know what to use, but you just have to figure out how to use it.
Exactly. But I do appreciate it, and I'm thinking about this now. I didn't necessarily like when you get to the later part of the game. They have this boss rush part before you get to Ganon. So you have to beat 4 bosses before you open up yet another door. And initially, I'm like, okay, are you just like padding the game out? But then once I realized how easy it was for me to beat them, I understood that was the purpose. Like, I think the whole purpose is, hey, you have the Master Sword, you have conquered all of this, so you should not struggle. And I didn't, and I felt awesome about it. And
because you got your sword's a lot stronger, especially with the first 2 bosses, because you still have your Master Sword, even though you're in like this back in time black and white scenery. So they take way less hits, so you feel more powerful.
But it's kind of a cheap way to increase the power. I'm not a big fan of that, and especially like it's kind of it's spawned in the Mega Man games where you have to do the boss rush before you get to Dr. Wily, and I always feel like that's a cheap way to go about it. And in the case of Wind Waker, I'm pretty sure that the developers have like straight out said that that was literally just a way to pad out the game. That and the Master Sword quest.
Well, yeah, there's
the Triforce quest, not the Master Sword quest.
Yeah, and I mean, should we just, I might as well just jump into it now. And the thing is, they were, I think, under a lot of, they ran out of time, essentially. So there was a lot that was cut from the game. And like, this is one of the Zelda games that actually has the least amount of dungeons of any game, if you really think about it. There's kind of 7. There's kind of,
yeah.
But it feels mostly like you have 5 proper dungeons in the game, and that you have your Dragon Roost Cavern, you have the Forbidden Woods, then you have the Tower of the Gods, and then you have the Earth Temple and the Wind Temple, and then Ganon's Tower is not really like a proper dungeon. And then people also mention, what's the other one?
Isn't it like the Skull Labyrinth or
the
something?
Forsaken, and then the Forsaken Fortress also isn't really a dungeon, and you visit it twice, but yeah.
Would you consider like the enemy levels? What was it called? Like the Skull Cavern, where it was part of the Triforce quest, where you have to go down the
Savage Labyrinth.
That was so annoying.
Yeah, the Savage Labyrinth. Yeah, it's not really like a dungeon either, and usually in other Zelda games like Twilight Princess also have that. I wouldn't really consider it a dungeon, but it is kind of like a enemy. That's more like an enemy rush mode, I guess, or whatever. Yeah, a lot of people, there's been a lot of speculation of, hey, what were the missing dungeons? Because they actually said outright that there was 2 dungeons that were cut from the game.
Okay.
And a lot of people have been asked, like, hey, what were those dungeons? And when the HD remake was coming out, there was actually an interview, and they were asking, hey, like, are you going to put those 2 missing dungeons in the game? And they basically said, well, we can't really do that because a lot of those ideas were used in Phantom Hourglass, Twilight Princess, and some of it might have ended up in Skyward Sword. So that caused all this speculation, like, what were those dungeons? So the most obvious place for where one of those dungeons could have went, I think a lot of people would think, is with, like, the Goddess Pearl, the Lineru one or whatever, where Jaboon just gives it to you, and you're kind of like, I didn't really do a dungeon for this pearl.
Yeah. Boy, you just spoke another language there.
Yeah. Well, you know, when you go to Great Fish Isle.
Oh, I know what you mean, but when you started saying LaRue's, Jaboos,
when you went to the place and they give you the thing.
Yeah.
Ryan, we are simple men.
So
you give us the thing to progress.
So yeah, Jaboon, who's like Jabu Jabu from Ocarina, you know, the big fish dude. So he just gives you the pearl where you had normally done the other dungeons to get one of these, and they just give it to you. So yeah.
Wait, I just got to pause. Ryan's got to feel like, can I have any other co-hosts for this episode?
Yeah.
I want to be able to say these names and be like, of course.
Yeah.
Mr.
I'm too into the weeds.
Jaru's
I'm too into the weeds.
Thinkaboo. It's like,
so anyway.
I'll tell you about weird Star Wars creatures all day. So I get it, but
yeah.
You know.
Either way, so that was one obvious point. A lot of people think that there was supposed to be like a inside Jabu's belly, like you had in Ocarina, that there was supposed to be something similar because people found like more audio files of like Jaboon when they data mined the game. So that's one speculation. There was also speculation that the ghost ship was supposed to be a full-on dungeon, and evidenced by, like I said, Anuma, who is the director of the game, said some of it found its way into Phantom Hourglass, and in Phantom Hourglass, the ghost ship is actually a dungeon.
That makes a lot of sense because when they said ghost ship in the game, or to find it, you know, I'm going through the day-night cycle, so I'm thinking, oh man, this is gonna be just like badass. I'm like, wait a minute, that was
room.
That was it.
Yeah,
so Phantom Hourglass,
cool, like if you consider still having to find the ghost map chart and then using that to find a dungeon, that would be pretty awesome.
So they actually, the ghost ship, they made like a central part of Phantom Hourglass. So they obviously took that idea and took it to the next level in that game. And then other kind of speculations, there was supposed to be an island called Stovepipe Island that was going to have kind of like Dragon Roost, this kind of volcano thing at the top, and there was going to be like a town at the bottom, and that could be part of that could have been like the Goron mines that ended up in Twilight Princess. So either way, you can definitely feel like there's a really low dungeon count, and I think that definitely hurt the game, and it's why they had to use things like the Triforce quest to pad things out. Another cool thing that was supposed to happen, I guess, was there were supposed to be more places you could go underwater in Hyrule, which I thought would have been really cool. There were supposed to be like these fishermen, and you would go underwater, and then when you wanted to come back up, you would like grab the hook, and then a fisherman would pull you back up. So I thought that would have been really cool because I do feel like the underwater part was really underutilized, and that's one of my favorite kind of aspects of the game. So those were kind of the key things.
Going back to the story stuff, there's a reveal that happens at the end of that game where they talk about like Hyrule being underwater, and that it's like, at least myself kind of put the one and one together. They're like, oh, it's probably some sunken city that's like long gone. But eventually you go to Hyrule underwater, and it is just like in a pristine condition, Ocarina of Time looking Hyrule, and it is awesome. That reveal, that was a moment in that game like, okay, you're getting
I wanted
me
to
back.
see more of it. Just like from a purely nostalgic standpoint, I'm like, oh.
Yeah, I really do wish you could see more, because when you go outside and you kind of like look around, you're like, oh, I wish I could explore more of this. But yeah, that is one of my favorite moments in any Zelda game is when you go to Hyrule and everything's like frozen in black and white, and then you pull the Master Sword, and for people who've played A Link to the Past, it starts to play like this more sad version of the Hyrule Castle theme, which I just thought was like the coolest thing ever, because even back in 2003, I didn't beat A Link to the Past, but I knew the Hyrule Castle music, which I thought was like one of my favorite pieces of music from that game. So to have that like nostalgia and everything, I thought was one of the coolest moments in the game.
I want to expand on that a little bit, and the overall sound design in this game as well, because maybe I'm wrong, but to me it was just dripping in Zelda nostalgia, the sound in this game, like having the your traditional Zelda music, and every time you go into like a building, pretty much a building, it has that like dun 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 dun.
Oh yeah.
And it just like having that and resonating with that, even to some of the enemy sound designs, like the wizards in that game use the same kind of like 3-tone magic sound as the not Ganon in A Link to the Past, a Zamorak or whatever his name was.
Aghanim,
that's it. A Zamorak.
You were close.
That's Hearthstone. Sorry, he just got a balance update in Battlegrounds today. I'm thinking of that wizard. But like just all of those little touches, they don't really like hit you over the head with it by doing subtle things like tweaking a version of an old song to make it fit more. They really don't.
There's some really subtle ones.
Yeah, and there's some really subtle ones so well.
In the Outset Island, first of all, I think this is my favorite sound. I think this is the best soundtrack in any Zelda game. And
it's really good.
You can fight me on that one.
I will not, actually.
Yeah, we won't.
I agree.
Well, I was
totally.
like any Zelda fans out there, because I think it's kind of like a concept album, right? Where you make an album and it's kind of has a central theme to it. I feel like Wind Waker, all the music really fits together, and it feels like one concept of like, the ocean, pirates, it all kind of fits into one theme. Whereas like Ocarina of Time has a great soundtrack, but I feel like it's kind of all over the place. Like you get Gerudo Valley, which is kind of like, a much different theme than like Kokiri for, the Lost Woods or things like that. But I feel like all the music in this game like feels very together and part of one concept. But like the theme on Outset has little hints of the music from Kokiri Forest from Ocarina of Time, kind of like the first area you start out in. And then if you go to Windfall Island, there's a little piece of the music that sounds like Kakariko Village, because they're kind of like the mirrored, it's kind of like the Kakariko Village of this game.
And it's cool now knowing that this game is a sequel to Ocarina of Time, because it's like this mirror world or this alternate universe of the game that's kind of playing on the music of it being an alternate version of those songs.
Yeah, in this Deku tree that's in the game is supposed to be that same Deku tree that after you beat the Forest Temple in Ocarina, like a new Deku tree sprouts. So he had to get tall.
Kidding.
He had to get tall AF to avoid all the water. But yeah, and also like the Kokiri, the children, the forest children, they become like the Koroks that you see. And that's why when you're playing like the Earth Temple music, you see like the ghost is like the children from like Ocarina, basically. Yeah, so some of these things, like, they evolved in Wind Waker. That's why, like, the Zora, the fish people, somehow evolved into bird people. So think about this, right? You have fish people, you flood everything, so there's all this water, and the fish become birds.
You kind of got the short end of the Deku stick there.
Kind of makes no sense, but there you go.
Sure.
It's a thing.
That is a thing. You know, something that I'm just connecting now, this game and to me, Super Mario Galaxy have a lot of similarities. Super Mario Galaxy, I always heard people saying, I love this game, one of the best of all time, but I'm like, but it's like tiny planets or whatever the hell, it's got to be stupid and dumb, and I don't get it. Then I play Galaxy for like an hour, I'm like, okay, my bad, it's an amazing game. With this, I always looked at the gameplay footage, and I'm like, it's very interesting because it's like these tiny islands, right? It's literally islands that you can walk all of it in like 10 seconds on average, right? Some of the other ones are larger, the main ones, etc. But the charm that each one of the islands has, like every island has a purpose. Even as tiny as they are, there's a reason that island is there for the most part, right? And I feel like that's what this game gets right. It's that I never went to a place thinking, well, I guess they needed to fill up the space with something, so it's there.
Yeah. There's some that are definitely a little on the weaker side. Like, there's a couple islands, I think it's literally just to get like one heart piece, and other than that, it has no purpose.
It is.
Because it's a very big map for 2003, this is an extremely big map, and it definitely seems like some of the islands, they were kind of running out of ideas, but like you said, for the most part, there's something to do at every island.
They struck gold with the fact that they made it an ocean game, because the ocean is supposed to feel vast. It's supposed to feel empty, and you're not supposed to run into everything like at a moment's notice. You're supposed to see something on the horizon and then make that your destination.
And definitely credit GameCube version with the impressive like draw distances with the islands and things like that. I think they had to do there's like a little bit of a trick to how they did that, where I don't think the actual island would load in until you were much closer. It's probably more
like a JPEG of it or something.
Yeah, it's probably just like a silhouette JPEG until you get close enough and then it loads in. But still, like you don't notice it.
And I think that part, and I'm happy, Keith, I didn't know like your love for like boating and all that part. I liked the fact that every place wasn't next to each other, because then why do the sailing at all? If every place was right next to each other, just like get a car, do like any other game. Like
Grand Theft Zelda.
Exactly. He had a motorcycle in the DLC for Breath of the Wild, right? Something like that. So
he did.
So I appreciated the fact that there was this downtime where I was able to just like look around, listen to the music. And I think that this is the Nintendo nostalgia talking, and also just like Nintendo, I know the seal of quality was nothing but like a PR thing, just so, games seem like they're better than they are. But something that Nintendo games, like the ones that they make, is that you'll listen to a soundtrack and you look at the game and you feel happy. And anytime that I was sailing in the game, literally nothing was happening. Not one thing. I'm not fighting anything up until later, right? Then you get to use like the bombs, and I actually like doing that. And I wish they would have done a little bit more with that. But the fact that one of my favorite parts of the game is when nothing was happening says a whole lot about the game. So I'd actually like to give you, Ryan, a bit of a forum. Having played it twice, what would you say is your least favorite thing about Wind Waker, whether it be just because you played it or you really do think it's just a poor part of the game?
So I would say, and I talked a bit about this on back when we did the Zelda tier list, but for me, the weakest part of this game is actually the dungeons. When you compare it to other Zelda games, I feel like this game did almost everything right, except for obviously the Triforce Fetch quest, which I think they vastly improved, but still it's not the greatest thing in the world. But other than that, it's not even the low dungeon count. I just don't feel like the dungeons in this game are as memorable or as fun as some of the other Zelda game dungeons. I think the Wind Temple is probably, in my opinion, the best dungeon in this game, because the other ones just don't stand out to me. And I think, looking at a game like Twilight Princess, I don't like Twilight Princess as much as I like Wind Waker, but the dungeons in Twilight Princess are a lot better than Wind Waker. That's the one thing Twilight Princess does right, if it does anything right, is dungeons. And obviously Ocarina dungeons are, almost all of them are great. To me, I just felt like no dungeon stands out to me as like, oh, this is an awesome dungeon. Because you can think of like, oh, Forest Temple, Ocarina of Time, or Snow Peak Ruins, Twilight Princess, Majora's Mask, Stone Tower Temple. But Wind Waker, it's
those.
Zelda fans will know what I'm talking about. But when you go like, oh, Wind Waker, best dungeon, you're like, I don't know, maybe the Wind Temple.
What was your favorite dungeon, Keith?
I honestly agree with Ryan and this could be a kind of side effect of the fact that I played through this game in just a couple of days. I poop socked this one real hard.
Yeah, you did, man. In how many days did you beat this game? Holy crap!
4. It was 4 days, start to finish, 4 long
and that last day was just
days.
Straight up collecting Triforce pieces or the charts.
It was not great, but I can't really tell you specific things from dungeons about whether I liked it or I disliked it. Like, they kind of bleed together for me, and yes, I understand the aesthetics are different, and the things that you do in them are different. But in my brain, they are separated to before the Zelda reveal and after the Zelda reveal as far as things that I enjoyed. Like, there are pieces of those first 3 that I really enjoyed. Like, I like the gliding in the Forbidden Forest. I thought like the wind and gliding puzzles in that were really cool. Could I tell you I liked the dungeon more than the other 2? Probably not, just because they all felt very samey to me. So I'm with Ryan on that one, where there's nothing that's really a giant standout beyond the boss fights at the end of them. I thought those were all excellent.
I'm actually, like, having played a ton of different Zelda games, none of the boss fights I found were particularly amazing, except for Puppet Ganon in Ganondorf. I think that's one of my favorite.
Yeah, Ganondorf, I haven't played them all, but Ganondorf is like top 2 boss fights in a Zelda game. It is so cool.
That whole sequence is just one of my favorite sequences ever.
And then you stab him in the goddamn forehead. It is
it's
Link
so epic.
Plays no games at the end of that.
So you're just like, what the hell? Because I think, it's a different Ganondorf. Maybe he's not as powerful, whatever. So he's still got this magic. So he creates this weird ass puppet thing. And the first 2 phases are pretty easy. And then this snake just kicks the living hell out of you. And you got to try your best to snipe him. I watched Juan suffering, and he actually, Juan, if it makes you feel better, once I got to that third part of the third hit on the snake, he was whooping my ass because he was going crazy.
Yeah, he beat the
one
hell
thing you
out of
can
me.
do that I didn't want to tell you, Juan, but I know if you smack him with your sword, he pauses for a very brief moment. But if you hit him with a bomb, he stalls for slightly longer and gives you more of a chance. But he was so erratic the last hit that I was just like hoping I just had to snipe him like old school, basically.
I did feel a very large adrenaline rush in that part. And
it's honestly the harder fight, in my opinion.
And I'm happy it was a more difficult fight because honestly, and I think that something that's very interesting with this review is that I feel like if we were to do a lot of bullet points for what we're talking about the game, there's not a lot of things that we're saying are amazing about it. I think it's that the presentation and the world is so well built.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the story, the visuals, the music, to me, the set pieces are all amazing.
That's why I was saying at the beginning, you kind of need to have 2 conversations about this game.
Yeah. Exactly. But then when it comes down to, like I said, I mean, even most of the gameplay through most of the game, like I said, is great. The sword fighting, the combat's all great. It's just the dungeons and some of the other sequences that are the weaker parts. But yeah, set pieces, like, to me, nothing is cooler than when you're fighting Ganondorf in literally the
Stab
ocean.
him in the
I was gonna say even
forehead.
But even before that, Hyrule's literally flooding in. So you have all this water flooding in behind you, like all the water is coming down. Like, it's just the most epic thing ever. And then, yeah, you stab him in the forehead. And to me, like, it's epic because until Breath of the Wild kind of got all funky with everything, there's 2 games that come after Wind Waker. And as far as we ever knew, the Master Sword is still at the bottom of the ocean, stuck in Ganondorf's head. Like, that is where, like, in that timeline, that is where the Master Sword still is, like, to this day, except who knows about Breath of the Wild.
I love the fact that, like, you pull the Master Sword out of a stone in the middle of that game, and then you turn Ganondorf into that stone, and you just put it right back in his skull.
It would be pretty epic if they made a game where you had to go down there and get the Master Sword out of his head. I feel like
don't do this to yourself, Ryan.
I feel like you're asking for trouble though for that.
I have a question. So, as somebody that never, like, I never finished Twilight Princess and I never beat Skyward Sword, is the Master Sword not in those games then? It's in Ganondorf?
No, well, okay, so you're asking for, this is a timeline question, Keith.
Yeah, I know what I've just gotten myself into, but I need to know.
Here we go.
And I have a follow-up question, but go ahead.
All right, the answer to Skyward Sword is very easy. Skyward Sword, canonically, is the very first game in any timeline. It's the earliest in the history. So the Skyward Sword is actually about crafting the Master Sword. That is the story. As far as Twilight Princess goes, like I said, Ocarina of Time has 2 endings to it. When you beat Ganon at the end of Ocarina of Time, Zelda sends you back in time to live out your childhood. So Wind Waker is that era where Ganon was killed and sealed away, and there's no link, and time moves on and Wind Waker happens. Twilight Princess is when Link's childhood, Majora's Mask happens, and then eventually Twilight Princess happens. Okay. So the Master Sword is still in the Temple of Time, although now it's like the ruins of it. And yeah, it goes from there, basically.
Okay, interesting. And one more Zelda general question, because it's something that I thought a lot about playing it, and I'm even more curious now that I know your thoughts on the dungeons. Because of where, like, this game came out in 2003, and between here and Breath of the Wild, there were a lot of other Zelda games, and what was it, like 15 years between the two? When did the Zelda dungeon fatigue start really playing in? Because I feel like it had to be around Wind Waker time that it kind of, like, Zelda fell into a formula that Breath of the Wild broke, and that was one of the highest praises that Breath of the Wild had.
So Wind Waker was where they started to really be, like I said, hand-holdy, and they made things a lot easier. Enemies did a lot less damage in this game compared to Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, and Twilight Princess was just as kind of simple with that. So I think people were starting around Twilight Princess to be like, okay, you're making the games too easy, and then it hit like a breaking point at Skyward Sword, where especially the game even starts you off with like 6 hearts as opposed to 3 hearts, and enemies didn't really hit for much. So people definitely noticed it around Wind Waker in the Twilight Princess era, and then it reached the breaking point at Skyward Sword, which is why Breath of the Wild is such like a counter to that.
Breath of fresh air.
Indeed. A wild world. It opened. Expanse.
Wow. You went there.
I did.
I just want to point out, Ryan sounds so sexy when he talks Zelda.
I know.
Just amazing.
It's just such
Just
confidence.
he's so dreamy.
Yeah.
Dreamy.
I like, these are the, I don't often, my girlfriend doesn't want to hear me talk about Zelda all day. So these are my chances to talk about this kind of stuff.
It's like,
you know?
stop
It's like me
talking
and
about the
wrestling,
Korok
buddy.
seeds, Ryan.
Yeah. I used to live for the timeline stuff before they revealed it. I'd be on the forums every day being like, well, what about Four Swords Adventures? How does this fit into everything?
Now, I got a question for both of you. We did a Zelda tier list. By we, I mean both of you. That's available on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/acastofthepast, and also on the podcast archives, which all of you lovely people can leave a 5-star review if you enjoy all of these episodes. And on said tier list, both of you, and I remember there was a bit of a debate here on the A tier. I have 3 games. I'm not going to spoil the rest for those that haven't checked that out, but on the A tier we have 3 games: Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, Wind Waker. And I feel like that is a very interesting thing to look at now.
Yeah, I really went with you on that one. Thinking back about
decisions,
that one.
Decisions
It was
were
pretty
made
much
there.
my tier list.
Yeah.
Okay,
You guys just brought in
Ryan's tier
comments.
list featuring
Yeah.
Keith with a possible appearance from Juan was those 3 games. Ryan and then Keith. Having played this Wii U version now and beaten it, Ryan, would you say it's still an A tier game for you? Would you bump it up or down?
I think it is still an A tier game because the story, like I said, story, visuals, music, gameplay itself is all phenomenal. And basically my A tier was a great game that has flaws. And like I said, the dungeons and the Triforce quest are really where the game is on the weaker side. And then you look at games like I said, Twilight Princess, that's a game where I'd say, okay, the story's pretty good, but it's a slog, and there's a lot of pacing is the biggest problem in Twilight Princess, but it has some dungeons that are some of my favorite dungeons of any Zelda, so I have to give it credit there. And Majora's Mask, one of my favorite stories, has the best side content of any Zelda, has one dungeon that's really amazing, and I love the whole time Groundhog's Day mechanic of it. So, all those games, like I said, great, but flawed. And I think that is where Wind Waker stands for me, is I have no problem going back and replaying this game because I love it so much, but I recognize that the dungeons aren't the greatest. Earth Temple was definitely one where I thought I liked it more than I did, having replayed it. I used to, as a kid, I used to like the Earth Temple and dislike the Wind Temple, and now that is completely flipped because playing that command, you have to play that command melody so many times, and Keith had to watch Link swing that baton just so many more times than me and Juan had to watch it. And that makes me a little happy. It makes me a little happy that Keith had to suffer more than us.
Thanks, buddy.
But anyway, yeah, I would still keep it where it is.
Yeah, I have to agree, where I would consider this game a great flawed game, where it especially thinking about other Zeldas that we put in the S tier, it doesn't hang with those, but I still think that this game is worth a play. Just make sure that you are playing the proper version of this game on the Wii U. We've said it 100 times, I'll say it once more, don't play the Gamecube. There's no reason to play the Gamecube. And hearing those changes and the differences in experience that we had, I would consider this game a very good but flawed game. You have amazing things that they did with the art direction, with the storytelling, with the music, and even the gameplay to some extent. It's just that it overstays its welcome a little bit, and that's where I consider the flaw in it, where they did things to improve it in the Wii U version of it, in the HD version, but you can't put a Band-Aid on something so fundamentally flawed as the Master, I keep saying the Master Sword, the Triforce Quest, and then fix it that way. It's something that you would need to redo from the ground up, and you just can't do that with a remake. So it has its flaws, but overall still a great game.
Yeah, obviously I'm not going to...
I was going to say one quick little tidbit of, it's definitely a game, if you're like me and you love to replay Zelda games a lot, it's definitely a game that I feel like you'll enjoy more on a second playthrough. It's one of those things, kind of like Ocarina. Once you know those stupid little quirks, like, oh, in Ocarina, I got to find the hook shot in the graveyard, right? A lot of people get lost there. But it's one of those things, once you know those stupid things, like where to get the fire and ice arrows, it's much more fun on a second playthrough, especially on the HD version where they cleaned up the Triforce quest. Like, I feel like, Juan, if you were to replay the game, you wouldn't mind the Triforce quest as much because you know what to do now and you know what to expect.
If anything, my biggest takeaway from this game is it almost makes me want to play Breath of the Wild, because it's like I played a couple of hours of Breath of the Wild.
Girlfriend, that's what I'm doing the second we stop recording, because that is what this game did for me.
You got the Zelda kick now?
Yeah, and I need to go, because I love Breath of the Wild. I mean, we've talked about it in previous episodes. It's our game of the decade, so I just want to go back and play Breath of the Wild now.
Okay. I'm gonna, because I guarantee you, if I'm thinking this, and you're thinking this, somebody listening it or watching is maybe thinking it. Say I started playing Breath of the Wild, but I dropped off. Would you recommend I turn it on and continue, or turn it on and start over?
I am going to take the route of turning it on and starting over. I mean, you do you, but the thing with Breath of the Wild is, like, it's a game, and I love this about it. It's so open that you can literally just go straight to Calamity Ganon if you want to. So you are only hindered by your own pace of exploration, right? So if you want to start over and get to where you were, pace is the only thing that's stopping you from doing that. There's not a lot of story stuff in it, and that's okay in Breath of the Wild for what they built. So I think I don't see any reason to just kind of pick up where you left off, especially with those early shrines and kind of getting your feet back under you.
The tutorial, if you played it before, the tutorial will not take you long. You can just go immediately to those 4 shrines you need to do, and you'll be off the tutorial island in like no time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, but I'm probably going to be going back to it. Don't think I'm going to maybe get to the end of it, but I do.
Just do it.
Just beat Calamity Ganon.
It could happen. I mean, it
it's
could
the
happen.
second. The dungeons in that game you can do in like 5 minutes.
Yeah, and the second that you start thinking like, I might put this down, just go to the final boss, give it a shot. The worst thing that could happen is you can't do it, and you put it down anyway. Yeah,
I mean, that's true. I mean, who knows? And the good thing is, like, I'll just stream it, because I know if I stream a Zelda game, Ryan is legally, contractually obligated to show up. So I'm like, okay, I'm lost. Hey, everybody, I'm live on Twitch. Ryan, what the hell do I do here, man?
I don't know.
Like, Juan's playing Zelda, and I'm like sitting there like, you just missed it. You just missed it. I'm like, just look up, man. The grappling hook thing is right there. Just look up. You passed it by like 5 times.
That's part of it.
Yeah.
But final question for Mr. McNulty. I feel like, and we talked about this before we hit the record, we've talked about a lot of great games in this podcast. Now that we've had this conversation, how do you feel about our discussion about the Waking of the Winds?
I feel pretty good about it. Like I said, I was really happy to replay, because this had been the Zelda game I'd gone the longest without playing, and I was really glad that you guys were kind of coming in completely cold, like not knowing what this game was or what it was about, and glad to see you enjoyed it. You know, I feel like your opinions kind of fell pretty much where I thought they would be. Essentially, I love the first half of the game, the second half not so much. It's pretty much the consensus, but like we've all said, it does some things so well that you can't help but love and appreciate a lot of what it does.
100%. No, I'm happy
Absolutely.
that we covered this game. It was very, very high on the things I need to play list, and I'm happy this podcast gave me the outlet to do so. And if you're listening and you've made it this far and you haven't played Wind Waker, first of all, thank you. Second of all, give it a try. It is very much worth your time.
Or wait,
exactly.
Well, we got the 35th anniversary coming out. If you don't have a Wii U,
just maybe
go to
wait it out.
Go to Player Juan on YouTube, and then you'll end up buying one. But or you can wait, or you can wait for the 35th anniversary of Zelda next year, where who knows what we're gonna get.
I mean, I'm hoping it's some good stuff, but very happy with we did this episode. And everybody watching and listening, don't forget that if you want to just connect with everybody that's part of the awesome community, you can head on over to acastofthepast.com/discord. And also, if you haven't, check out one of our previous episodes. Ryan and I closed off the year talking about some of our favorite gaming pickups. I feel like it's a very casual conversation that can just give you a pretty good look of, what are some of our pickups this year. And it'll be very interesting what the three of us as gamers, whether it be something we talk about on the podcast or even we don't, like, what do we play next year, right? I feel like everybody's going through a phase, and now with the PS5 and Series X and everything out there, I think that I'm just going to stick with my Wii U and PS3. So up until next time, that has been it for another exciting edition of A Cast
to the
Past.
Now, Keith, what was the first word you thought of when you knew you had to get all those charts there?
I can't say it.